There's a moment in the life of every child raised by narcissistic parents that changes everything. A moment that most don't consciously remember. But that left such a profound mark, it still dictates how you see yourself today. It's the moment the mirror stopped being just an object and became an enemy. The moment you looked into your own reflection and, for the first time, felt that something was wrong. Not with the world, with you, with your face, with your very existence. Carl Jung called this the birth of the shadow in the mirror. And in the next few minutes, you're going to discover exactly how this happened to you, why it happened, and how this moment continues to control your life to this day. But before we reveal the mechanism, I need you to understand something fundamental. Babies aren't born hating their faces. Young children aren't born ashamed of their bodies. This is learned. And the question that few therapists ask is the most important of all. Who taught you to hate yourself? The answer, in most cases, lies in the eyes that first looked at you, your parents' eyes. Jung developed a concept he called primary mirroring. The idea is simple but devastating. In the first years of life, a child has no ability to form an image of themselves. They depend completely on the reflection they see in their caregiver's eyes. If the mother looks at the baby with delight, with unconditional love, with genuine joy for their existence, the baby internalizes that message. I am lovable. I am worthy of love. My existence brings joy. But what if the mother looks with irritation, with disappointment, with emotional emptiness, with criticism? The child internalizes a completely different message. Something is wrong with me. My existence doesn't bring joy. I am a burden. And here's what most videos about narcissism don't reveal. This happens long before the child has words to describe it. It happens at pre-verbal, pre-conscious levels. The child doesn't think, I am not loved. They feel it in their body. Feel it in the way they recoil when the mother approaches. Feel it in the tension that arises before any interaction. Hold on to that, because it's going to make sense in an instant when we talk about the mirror, the physical mirror. That object on the bathroom wall becomes the substitute for the emotional mirror that the parents should have been. And when the child finally looks at their reflection, they don't see themselves objectively. They see themselves through the eyes that first saw them. If those eyes were critical, they'll see a face worthy of criticism. If those eyes were disappointed, they'll see a disappointing face. Let me tell you about Melissa. She was 7 years old when it happened. Her mother was a woman obsessed with appearance, constantly dieting, constantly criticizing herself in front of the mirror, constantly making comments about other people's weight. Melissa was a perfectly healthy child, but her mother was always adjusting her clothes, pulling at her stomach, commenting that she was eating too much. One day, Melissa was playing in her room and passed by the hall mirror. She stopped, looked at her reflection, and for the first time, and instead of seeing just a girl playing, she saw what her mother saw: a stomach that needed to be hidden, thighs that were too thick, a face that wasn't pretty enough. In that moment, something died in Melissa, the true self, that part of her that simply existed without judgment, was replaced by a critical observer, an observer that had her mother's voice, an observer that would never leave her alone again. Jung called this the introjection of the parental complex. The child literally absorbs the way the parents see them and transforms it into part of their own psyche. The external critic becomes the internal critic. And that internal critic, once installed, doesn't need the parents anymore to function. It operates automatically, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for the rest of their life. Melissa is 42 years old today. She's had 3 plastic surgeries. None of them have made her feel beautiful, because the problem was never her face. The problem was the internal mirror that her mother installed in her at 7 years old. Hold on, because the most important part about how this works comes now. There are different forms of self-image destruction, and each leaves a specific wound. I'm going to describe the 5 main ones, and as you listen, pay attention to which resonates most with your own experience. The first form is constant comparison. Parents who are always comparing the child to siblings, cousins, friends' children. Why can't you be handsome like your brother? Look at the neighbor's daughter's hair. Why can't yours be like that? Each comparison is a knife that cuts away at the child's ability to see themselves with acceptance. Robert grew up hearing that his older brother was the handsome one in the family. He was the smart one, which meant, implicitly, that Robert wasn't handsome. At 35, Robert avoids photos, avoids mirrors, avoids any situation where he needs to see his reflection. He's internalized so deeply the message that he wasn't handsome that he's developed what Jung would call a physical inferiority complex, an autonomous part of his psyche that automatically triggers shame every time he sees his face. The second form is direct criticism. Parents who openly comment on the child's physical flaws. Your nose is too big. Your ears are weird. You'd be pretty if it weren't for that chin. These phrases seem like observations, but they're programming. They're codes inserted into the child's psychic software that will run forever. Julie was 8 years old when her mother said, looking at her with genuine concern, "It's a shame you got your father's nose." It was said as if it were fact, as if it were a neutral observation. But Julie understood the real message. Something in my face is wrong. Something in me is worthy of pity. Today, at 38, Julie has already had a rhinoplasty. The surgeon said her nose was perfectly normal, but she couldn't see it. She could only see what her mother saw, a nose that was a reason for pity. The third form is absent mirroring. Parents who simply don't look, who are always busy, always distracted, always somewhere else emotionally. The child looks to these parents seeking reflection and finds emptiness. And that emptiness is interpreted as rejection. If my parents don't even look at me, well, I must be invisible. If I'm invisible, I'm not worth being seen. Mark grew up with a workaholic father and a depressed mother. Neither of them had the emotional energy to really see him. They took care of the basic needs: food, school, clothes. But there was never that look of delight. There was never that sparkle in the eye that says, "You are wonderful for existing." Mark developed something that seems contradictory. On one hand, they desperately seek attention. On the other, they feel deeply uncomfortable when they receive it. Carl Jung would explain this as the wound of the invisible. They need to be seen to feel real, but when they are seen, the shame flares up because they've internalized that they're not worthy of being seen. The fourth form is the projection of the parental shadow. Parents who project their own insecurities onto their children. The mom who hates her own body projects that hatred onto her daughter. The dad who's ashamed of his appearance projects that shame onto his son. The child becomes a canvas for the parents' unresolved insecurities. It's like they're wearing their parents' anxieties. Julie had a mother who struggled her entire life with an eating disorder. The mother never directly said that Julie was overweight, but she watched every bite, commented about calories. Tyus sighed heavily when Julie went back for seconds. The message was clear, without needing words. Your body needs to be controlled. Your appetite is dangerous. You can't trust yourself. Julie developed anorexia at 15. She spent years in treatment. Today, at 40 years old, she still struggles with her body image. She knows, intellectually, that her body is healthy, but emotionally she still sees herself through the anxious eyes of her mother. It's a permanent filter. The fifth form is the invalidation of perception. Parents who tell the child that they don't see what they see. You're not ugly, stop being dramatic. You're exaggerating. It's not that bad. It seems positive, but it's devastating. Because the child learns that their perception isn't reliable, that they can't trust what they feel, that their own eyes lie. And here is the cruel paradox. The child knows that something is wrong, feels the rejection, feels the criticism, but the parents say no, that they're imagining things. So the child concludes that the problem isn't the family. The problem is them. Their perception is defective. They are defective. Robert grew up with parents who insisted that they were loving, that they never did anything wrong. that any problem was his exaggeration. But Robert felt the coldness, felt the distance, felt that he was never good enough. And because he couldn't trust his perception, he concluded that he was the problem. His face, his body, his very existence, all proof of his inadequacy. He felt fundamentally flawed. You've just seen 5 different forms of self-image destruction. 5 different paths that lead to the same destination. The mirror as an enemy, the reflection as a source of pain. Your own face is a constant reminder that something is fundamentally wrong. It's a trap. And the tragedy is that none of this is true. Your face was never the problem. The eyes that first looked at you were the problem. The inability of your parents to see your inherent beauty was the problem. Your distorted perception was installed, not born. It was imposed on you. But here's what Jung gives us as hope. What was installed can be uninstalled. What was learned can be unlearned. The complex that operates automatically can be brought to consciousness and slowly transformed. There is hope. Each video like this demands deep research into Jungian psychology and narcissistic family dynamics. It demands the ability to translate complex concepts into language that resonates with real experiences. It demands the commitment to bring light to wounds that most prefer to keep in the dark. It's a heavy responsibility. The super thanks down below isn't just financial support. It's you saying that this type of content matters. It's you recognizing that understanding what happened is the first step toward healing. When you click that golden heart, you participate in something bigger, a community of people who chose to stop blaming themselves and start understanding. You're joining a movement, getting back to transformation, because there's more you need to know. We're just scratching the surface. Jung identified something he called an autonomous complex. It's a part of the psyche that operates independently of conscious will. You don't decide to hate your face. The complex fires automatically every time you see your reflection. It's like a program running in the background on the computer of your mind. You didn't consciously start it. It was installed by your parents, but it keeps running, consuming energy, distorting perception. It's an intrusion. The good news is that complexes can be integrated, not eliminated, because nothing in the psyche is truly eliminated, but integrated, brought to consciousness, understood. And when that happens, they lose their autonomous power. They become manageable. Let me explain to you how this works in practice. Let's break it down. The first step is recognition. You need to identify the exact moment when the complex fires. For most people who hate their reflection, this happens automatically. They look in the mirror and already feel the contraction, the shame, the critical voice. There's no space between seeing and judging. The judgment is instantaneous. It's a reflex. The initial work is to create that space. Instead of simply reacting, you stop and observe. What exactly am I feeling now? What words are passing through my mind? Whose voice is this that's criticizing me? Get curious. Melissa did this exercise for 3 months. Every time she looked in the mirror, she paused and asked, "Whose voice is this?" In the beginning, the answer was automatic. My voice. I'm the one who's criticizing myself. But over time, she began to perceive nuances. The voice had a tone, a rhythm, a way of speaking. And that way was identical to the way her mother spoke. It was uncanny. This is the moment of insight that Jung considered crucial. When you realize that the critical voice isn't yours, but it's an introjection, when you recognize that the cruel observer inside you was installed by someone from the outside, in that moment you begin to separate from the complex. You stop identifying completely with it. You reclaim yourself. Melissa began to respond to the voice. When she heard it, she said, "That's not me talking, that's my mum." She would say, either out loud or mentally, "Thanks for the concern, Mom, but I disagree." It seems simple. It even seems silly. But this small act of conscious resistance begins to weaken the complex, because the complex depends on operating automatically, without question. When you question it, you break the automatism. You take back control. The second step is grief. This is harder than it seems, because you're not just healing a wound, You're recognizing that the wound should never have existed. You're accepting that your parents failed in a fundamental way, that the love you deserved wasn't given, that the eyes that should have lit up when they saw you were opaque, critical, or completely absent. It's a deep sorrow. Jung spoke about the need to grieve the ideal father and mother. We all have archetypal images of how parents should be: protective, loving, who see us with delight. When real parents fail drastically in relation to this archetype, the child is trapped between two realities: the reality of what should have been and the reality of what was. It's a profound disconnect. Mark needed 2 years of therapy to mourn the childhood he didn't have. He spent his entire life minimizing. It wasn't that bad. At least I had food and shelter. But beneath the surface there was a well of grief, waiting to be acknowledged. It's time to face the truth. A lot of people have had it worse, but those rationalizations were defenses against the pain. When he finally allowed himself to feel the magnitude of the loss, of what it meant to have never been truly seen by his own parents, something shifted within him. Grief isn't about blaming your parents. Many parents who failed at primary mirroring were also children who weren't seen. They passed on what they received. But recognizing this doesn't eliminate the pain. You can understand why your parents were incapable and still feel the wound that incapacity caused. The third step is what Carl Jung called reparenting. It's the process of giving yourself what your parents didn't give you. It's learning to look at your own reflection with the eyes you should have found in childhood, with delight, with acceptance, with unconditional love. According to Jung, the journey towards wholeness requires us to integrate these neglected parts of ourselves. This seems impossible at first. How can I love myself if everything in me screams that I'm inadequate? But the answer lies in understanding that this scream is not your own. It's the echo of old voices. It's the programming running. It's the parental complex operating. You're not trying to create love from nothing. You're trying to access the love that has always been available. But that was blocked by parental introjection. Julie started a simple practice here every morning before leaving the house. She looked in the mirror and said 3 things she appreciated about herself. They didn't need to be physical things. They could be anything. I like my courage. No, I admire my persistence. I appreciate my sensitivity. In the beginning, the words felt like a lie. The critical voice screamed louder, but she persisted, day after day, week after week. And slowly, something began to change. Not that the critical voice disappeared. It's still there. But now, there's another voice. A voice that Julie cultivated consciously. A voice that offers an alternative perspective. The 4th step is what I call corrective experiences. These are moments where you allow yourself to be seen through different eyes. Eyes that don't carry the distortion of your parents. It could be a therapist. It could be a true friend. It could be a loving partner. Someone who looks at you and sees beauty where you learned to see flaws. Carolyn resisted this for years. Whenever someone complimented her appearance, she automatically discounted it. They're just being polite. They're not seeing me up close. If they saw what I see, they wouldn't say that. But with therapy, she began to experiment with receiving compliments, without immediately dismissing them, just receiving, letting it in, allowing the different message to exist alongside the old one. It's not about replacing one perception with another. It's not about convincing yourself that you're beautiful when all your programming says otherwise. It's about creating space for multiple perceptions. It's about recognizing that your parents' view was just one view, not the absolute truth, about allowing other views to coexist. The 5th step, and perhaps the most important, is shadow integration. Jung said that the shadow contains everything we reject in ourselves, and when we reject our own face, when we reject our appearance, and we're creating a physical shadow, a part of ourselves that we push into the dark, because it's been labeled as unacceptable. Integration doesn't mean loving your face overnight. It means stopping the fight against it. It means recognizing that this face is yours, that it tells your story, that it carries the marks of everything you've lived through, and that rejecting it is rejecting a fundamental part of who you are. Carl Jung believed that acknowledging our shadow self is essential for psychological growth. Paul reached a point in his journey where he realized something profound. All the energy he spent hating his face was energy he could be using to live. All the hours wasted in front of the mirror, cataloging flaws, were hours stolen from real experiences. The self-hatred was a vampire, sucking away his vitality. He didn't wake up one day loving his reflection, but he woke up one day tired of hating it. And that weariness was the beginning of peace, not love. Peace, weary acceptance. And that was enough to begin. Remember when I talked about the moment when the mirror became the enemy? There's another moment possible. The moment when the mirror returns to being just a mirror, not a judge, not an enemy, not a reminder of inadequacy, just a reflecting surface that shows your face, without judgment, without a narrative, without the voices of your parents. That moment doesn't come quickly. For some, it takes years of conscious work. For others, it may never come completely, but the direction matters more than the destination. Every small movement towards acceptance is a victory. Every moment of peace in front of the mirror is a triumph over the programming. Jung deeply believed in the human capacity for individuation, to become who we truly are, beyond projections and introjections, to find the true self that was buried under layers of conditioning. And part of that true self is the ability to see yourself with your own eyes, not with the eyes of your parents, not with the eyes of society, your own eyes. But there's something even deeper that we need to address: generational transmission. Jung called this participation mystique, an unconscious connection that passes from generation to generation, carrying patterns or wounds and ways of seeing that were never questioned. When your mother looked at you with critical eyes, she wasn't inventing that criticism from nothing. She was looking with the eyes that her own mother used to look at her, and her grandmother looked with the eyes that her great-grandmother used. The chain stretches back, generation after generation, each passing on the inability to see with love. Anne discovered this in therapy at 45. She was talking about how much she hated her hands, hands she considered too ugly, too big, too masculine. And suddenly, she remembered something she had forgotten for decades. Her mother also hated her own hands. She wore gloves whenever she could, hid her hands in photos, and her grandmother, whom Anne barely knew, was also ashamed of her hands. 3 generations of women hating the same hands. The perception that Anne had of her hands wasn't hers. It was an inheritance, a legacy of shame passed down from woman to woman, as if it were family jewels. Except this inheritance didn't bring beauty, it brought pain. Jung said that what is not brought to consciousness comes to us as fate. As long as the current of shame remains unconscious, it continues to be transmitted. The mother who hates her body passes that hatred onto her daughter without realizing it. The father who is ashamed of his appearance projects that shame onto his son without conscious intention. But when you bring it to light, when you recognize that this shame isn't originally yours, something remarkable happens. The chain can be broken. You can be the generation that stops transmitting. Anne decided something powerful. She had a 12-year-old daughter and realized she was already, unconsciously, passing on the legacy. She had already made comments about her daughter's hands. She had already noticed the girl hiding her hands in photos. The pattern was repeating itself, but Amy chose differently. She started praising her own hands in front of her daughter. She started using her hands in expansive gestures. She started showing her hands in photos, not because she suddenly loved her hands, but because she understood that her daughter was observing, and that what she modeled would be internalized. This is what Carl Jung called redemption through consciousness. You can't change what your parents did. You can't erase the programming they installed. but you can choose not to pass it on. You can be the link in the chain that decides to stop. And this choice doesn't just benefit future generations. Something mysterious happens when you decide to interrupt the pattern. The energy that was trapped in compulsive repetition is released. What was destiny becomes choice. What was automatic becomes conscious. Let me give you something practical. An exercise that may seem simple, but that carries immense depth. Choose a moment of the day, always the same. It could be in the morning when you wake up. It could be at night before you go to sleep. Go to a mirror. Look at your reflection. And instead of letting the critical voice speak, ask a different question. Ask your reflection, whose are these eyes that are judging me now? Don't answer immediately. Stay with the question. Let it penetrate. Observe what arises. It could be a memory. It could be a sensation. It could be the image of a face that isn't your own. Whatever the answer, it will give you information about the origin of the judgment. Then ask a second question. How would I look at myself if those eyes didn't exist? Again, don't force an answer. Just allow. Maybe you can't imagine it. Maybe the critical voice comes back immediately. That's okay. The exercise isn't about being successful. It's about creating a fissure in the automatism, a small opening where light can enter. Robert did this exercise for 6 months. In the beginning, he couldn't stay more than 10 seconds in front of the mirror. The anxiety was too much. The judgment came too quickly. But he persisted. 10 seconds became 20. 20 became a minute. And one day, something unexpected happened. He looked at his reflection, and for a brief moment, he didn't see the handsome brother against whom he was always compared. He didn't hear his father's voice saying that he was the smart one, not the good-looking one. For a moment he saw only a man, a 35-year-old man with a face that was simply his face, without comparison, without judgment, just existence. The moment lasted seconds. Then the critical voice returned. But those seconds were enough. They proved that it was possible, that there was a space beyond the programming, that the mirror could eventually be just a mirror. Jung wrote that the encounter with the shadow is the work of a lifetime. He wasn't exaggerating. The part of us that was rejected, including our own face, doesn't integrate in weeks or months. It's a process that continues, that deepens, that reveals increasingly subtle layers. But the fact that it's a long job doesn't mean it's not worth starting. Each day that you choose consciousness over automatism is a day of freedom. Each moment in which you question the critical voice is a moment of internal revolution. Every time you refuse to pass on, the shame is a victory for future generations. There's an image that Jung used. He talked about the philosopher's stone, the goal of inner alchemy, and he said that this stone isn't something you create from nothing. It's something you discover beneath layers of rubble. The gold has always been there. You just need to remove what hides it. Your face has always been complete. Your beauty has always existed. What your parents installed was a layer of distortion over that reality. And the job isn't to create beauty where it doesn't exist. It's to remove the distortion so that you can finally see what has always been there. Carol came to this understanding after years of inner work. She said something that stayed with me. I spent my life thinking I needed to fix my body. I needed to lose weight. I needed to change, and I needed to become acceptable. And one day I realized that my body never needed to be fixed. It needed to be seen, truly seen, by eyes that weren't my mother's. And when she finally found those eyes, first in a therapist, then in true friends, then, slowly, in herself, something changed. Not that she started to find herself beautiful according to external standards, but she stopped thinking she was wrong, and that's the crucial difference. It's not about thinking you're pretty. It's about stopping thinking you're wrong. The mirror that became an enemy can become neutral, and neutral. After decades of war, feels almost like peace, feels almost like love, feels almost like healing. You weren't born hating your face. You learned, And what was learned can be unlearned. The mirror can stop being the enemy. And the reflection can eventually become just that. A reflection. Neutral. Yours. Without the burden of decades of internalized criticism, the journey is long, the journey is difficult, but the journey is possible. And the first step was taken now, in this moment, when you understood where the hatred came from, not from you, from eyes that didn't know how to see, from parents who didn't know how to love, from a fault that was never yours. Your face was never the problem. The eyes that first looked at you were the problem, and now you can start to look with new eyes. Eyes that you yourself are cultivating. Eyes that see what your parents could never see. You, as you really are, as worthy of being seen, worthy of being loved, whole. Write in the comments the age you were when the mirror became the enemy. That number tells a story. It tells when the programming was installed, and sharing that number with others who have been through the same thing can be the beginning of something. The beginning of not feeling alone in this pain. The beginning of realizing that it wasn't just you, that it was never just you, that millions of children have gone through the same moment, and that together we can start to look differently.